Okay, it's recording.
All right, I will start by saying I am an invertebrate biologist, an entomologist more specifically. So insects are my favorite group of invertebrates, but they don't get they get all the attention. And there are many, many, many other invertebrates that I think deserve a little bit of attention. And I did quite a bit of learning while I put this presentation together for you all. I knew of some of these organisms and their ties to bryophytes, but I learned of many, many more. And so now I come to you with this fresh excitement to share with you the discoveries that I made. So the talk that I prepared for you all, Stacy actually helped me come up with this. Bryophyte dwellers and diners. And I added this little subtitle to the end, Invertebrate Tales from Amidst the Phyllids, right? Because mosses don't have true leaves. So I'll start by asking this pretty simple, straightforward question. If you're an invertebrate, why live in moss? You know, there are many, many habitats out there, and invertebrates exist in a wide variety of places. But why is moss such a safari when it comes to these small organisms? Well, firstly and foremostly, bryophytes make really good homes, and as we'll see, sometimes really good snacks. They sponge up moisture, and this kind of moisture is necessary for small creatures. Small creatures' surface to area volume, their surface area to volume ratios make it such that they constantly have to worry about being desiccated. And when they live in mosses and other bryophytes like the liverworts, the ambient moisture helps prevent desiccation from happening before these organisms are ready. Bryophytes also provide shelter from predators and the elements, especially snow. As we'll see again and again and again, lots of invertebrates that live in snowy climates rely on mosses as little refugia to carry out different parts of their life cycles, which is a very cool connection because one of my favorite groups of invertebrates are the winter or the Nivian, the snow-dwelling invertebrates. And then just, lastly, if these creatures don't feed directly on the moss or, again, liverworts, these non-vascular plants are very good at accumulating detritus, bacteria, fungi, microbes, other kinds of organic material, and that is a bountiful forage for these small organisms that live in this habitat. So this is a fun word, and I heard it recently. Someone was describing a juniper tree as poikilohydric. I don't know if juniper trees are actually poikilohydric, but what certainly is are terrestrial mosses. So I'll define what this is here in a moment. But poikilohydry is going to be sort of our guiding biological theme for this talk. Organisms that are poikilohydric are organisms that maintain an internal water content that matches their surroundings. That way they don't have to worry about trying to hold on to moisture. If the climate dries out, these organisms dry out with it, and they just kind of bide their time until the next influx of water happens. Terrestrial moss is a fantastic example of a poikilohydric organism. This metaphor, nature is poetic and beautiful, I certainly think. So I would like to extend this into sort of an ecological metaphor. Poikilohydry is essentially a descriptor for creatures that live their lives in rhythm with water, with the presence of water on a landscape. All the organisms we're going to talk about today sort of have to deal with this periodic drying, and many of them have components of their life cycles that can spring right back to life when that water shows up, right? Because that is a critical part of making a living in a moss or a bryophyte. Especially the terrestrial ones. This strategy is also relevant to another one of my favorite invertebrate communities. This is just a quick shout out to the vernal pool crustaceans imaged here on the right. These are the fairy shrimp, the tadpole shrimp, the clam shrimp. These organisms are also poikilohydric. So lots of common ground between the invertebrates and the bryophytes here. So without further ado, I'm going to tell the story of the denizens of the bryophytes in 3 acts. I'm going to do a little 3-act story. And I'm going to interpret invertebrates much more literally than I will taxonomically. You'll see exactly what I mean with this next slide. So here's Act 1, the invisible legion. Scene 1 are the bacteria and fungi. These are microscopic organisms. They are invertebrates, not taxonomically, right? They are distantly related to the true invertebrates, the bilaterally symmetrical animals. But these organisms don't have vertebrae. In fact, they don't even have membrane-bound organelles. At least the bacteria don't. But these are unicellular life forms that make a living within the moss or the liverwort precisely because of that moisture retention. And a lot of these organisms, even some of these unicellular fungi, provide the basis of the food chain in addition to the moss's tissues themselves. For all of the organisms we are going to be talking about subsequently, they depend on either these organisms or the moss tissues, or in some cases both. So I felt it was very important to take a nod to the very foundations of the food chains of some of these bryophilic organisms, these bryophyte-loving organisms. Scene 2 in our Invisible Legion act are the protozoa. We're getting a little bit more complicated here than just bacteria. The protists comprise a mind-boggling diversity of organisms, and their taxonomy is just in constant chaos. I just have a few examples here. Some testate amoebae, we'll take a look at those. Euglena, Paramecia, Dileptis, Vorticella, and many others. There is an inexhaustible treasure trove of unicellular life that can be found making a living on the phyllids of mosses. I'll just walk through a few of my favorites. This is Dileptis. This is a unicellular predator that can eat multicellular prey. Pretty scary. They prey on these organisms with this floppy proboscis, which you can see in this illustrated figure here. And then here's a picture of one under a scope here. But Dileptis are large. You probably will be able to see these organisms with a dissecting scope if you have a hydrated moss sample. Of course, here's another one, Vorticella. So here's an aquatic moss over here on the left. Vorticella are also fairly large protists. You can see them with the naked eye. They look like these cloudy little moldy growths on mosses. This is actually a picture from my aquarium. And then I grabbed some of this and I put it under my scope, which is this video in the middle. Vorticella are sweet protists. They have this sort of fear response. If they feel threatened, they'll coil on their little stalks here and retract. So don't know if you could see some of that in that video. And then, of course, here's an illustration. This is a unicellular ciliate, again, often a denizen of some mosses. And then this is probably one of my favorite protozoal denizens of moss. This is Deflugia. So this is an amoeba, but it is not a free-living amoeba, kind of like the snot smears that we're all used to seeing with their pseudopods oozing across the slide. Deflugia still has those wonderfully charismatic characteristics of the amoeba protozoans, but they are also artists. They build these awesome mosaics out of the discarded silicon tests of the diatoms they eat. They make these beautiful glass houses. So here's a picture of one right here on the right of one of the Deflugia. Some of these can look like glass lanterns, though. Here's another example of a Deflugia test. So Deflugia, again, is a fairly large protist. And if there are diatoms living in and amongst the moss, you will probably have a good chance of discovering Deflugia. One of the reasons there are so many protists in mosses is because the mosses themselves keep the ambient water film that covers them incredibly well oxygenated. So it allows this tremendous abundance of protozoal life to take hold, in addition to the abundance of other microbial food sources, such as some of those bacteria. Okay, we'll quickly get bogged in the weeds if we stay in with the protozoans. On to the multicellular life. Scene 3, this is the last scene of Act 1. I'm going to introduce the Ecdysozoa, nematodes, rotifers, and water bears. Oh my. So first, we have to figure out, so this group is named the Ecdysozoans after this process ecdysis. So what the heck is ecdysis? Ecdysis is a process which these small animals use to grow. They have a chitinous body, and in order to grow, they have to shed that chitinous body in order to grow larger. Arthropods, such as this roly-poly here, are members of the Ecdysozoa. So they all have to shed this chitinous exoskeleton in order to grow. But we'll take a look at some other Ecdysozoans before we dive into the arthropods, because the arthropods are a huge group. So here's just a tree, a little family tree to kind of give us some orientation, some evolutionary orientation. Ecdysozoa includes a lot of really small, interesting animals. The tardigrades, the water bears are ecdysozoans, nematode worms are ecdysozoans, and we'll take a look at some other animals that are also ecdysozoans, the rotifers and the gastrotrichs. So the first one, this is a fairly familiar organism to most of us who are familiar to biology. The roundworms, the nematodes, these are chitin armored roundworms. Nematodes are incredibly abundant in soils, incredibly abundant in mosses. They are hunting yeast and bacteria predominantly, and they'll sometimes eat algae as well in a moss, but they probably do not attack the moss itself. They're just denizens. Here are some rotifers. These are another small multicellular animal. They are also ecdysozoans. They also have to shed a chitinous cuticle to grow. They have these filamentous mouth parts that kind of look like buzzsaws under the microscope, and they're essentially filter feeders. They're straining water through these filtrous mouth parts to consume and ingest bacteria. I always love finding a rotifer. They're a lot of fun. They look like they have two little buzzsaws going for mouth parts. Oh, here you go. This is a classic. Who doesn't love a little water bear? They're so cute as they crawl along. This is another ecdysozoan, very famous. You know, the popular culture has just fallen in love with this organism. They're indestructible. They're cute. They're detritivores, and they're almost ubiquitous. If you have a moss and a terrestrial moss, or I'm sure liverwort as well, if you rehydrate it and then look at it under the scope, you'll probably see tardigrades crawling around, these water bears. Tardigrades have a cousin, the gastrotrichs. Some of the gastrotrichs, like the one on the left here, are harmless filter feeders, and then that gastrotrich on the left, right, those are the jaws of death. Some of these gastrotrichs are starting to represent some of the first multicellular complex predators that are living in mosses to feed on the other organisms that call them home. So we have one of our first examples of a multicellular predator. The gastrotrichs, another ecdysozoan, close relatives of the water bears. These are small multicellular animals. Again, they have this chitinous cuticle that they have to shed to grow. So that about wraps up Act 1, the invisible legion. All of those organisms are not clearly and readily visible to the naked eye. You need a scope to see them. Act 2 will look at some non-hexapod arthropod denizens of mosses. You can see these without a microscope quite easily. A hand lens might reveal some more detail on these organisms, but they're readily observable. First, we have to talk about what is an arthropod. This is just a quick little entomology lesson here. Arthropods, these mean jointed legs. These are the ecdysozoans. They have a chitinous exoskeleton, but they have jointed legs and bodies. The rotifers, the rotifers and the tardigrades, their bodies are not as strictly segmented as the arthropods are, and furthermore, their appendages aren't really segmented either. But they are ecdysozoans, so they still have this exoskeleton made of chitin, and of course, when they need to grow, they have to get rid of that exoskeleton to grow larger. A little mnemonic that I use for the scouts, I sometimes teach Boy and Girl Scouts this to remember what an arthropod or an ecdysozoan is, right? If you step on one, it will go crunch, squish, right? But we have endoskeleton, so if a giant were to step on one of us, we would go squish, crunch. So that's how you can keep all of this externalized skeleton nonsense straight in your mind. So that is the first sort of scene, was to introduce ourselves to the arthropods. Here is a classic example of an arthropod. These are the myriapods. On the left is a millipede. Millipedes are probably the most common myriapod denizens of moss. They are detritivores, sometimes herbivores, but millipedes are basically the living floss of a moss. They're in there trying to get all of the detritus and goop that's built up in between the moss stems and eat all of that out. And then, of course, we have some soil-dwelling centipedes. That's that picture on the right. These are small, but no less ferocious predators. They are venomous, they are fast, they are intelligent. These are clever death noodles that wander through mosses in search of the hapless invertebrate that they can overwhelm and consume. Now, some millipedes, look a heck of a lot like their cousins, the crustaceans, the isopods. We took a look at an isopod earlier. This is a very common moss-dwelling millipede in some of the more tropical regions. These pill-shaped millipedes, they kind of look like pill bugs. Of course, they're entirely different groups. The myriapods, the millipedes, and centipedes, and then roly-polies and the pill bugs are actually crustaceans. They're more closely related to lobsters and crabs. But there is some cool convergent evolution happening here in some of these moss-dwelling millipedes. There are certainly crustaceans that make their homes in mosses, especially aquatic moss. These are some of my favorite organisms of all time. On the upper left, we have a copepod female. She's dragging some eggs behind her. This is an interesting and unique walk of life as far as crustaceans go. Right below that, we have a Daphnia, one of the water fleas. They're brachiopods. They're closely related to fairy shrimp and sea monkeys and tadpole shrimp and the like. In the center, we have one of the ostracods or seed shrimp. They have this bivalve body plan, kind of like a clam, but they are not a mollusk. They are a crustacean, and they use this to protect themselves from nasty predators, such as the organism over here on the far right. This is one of the amphipods. The common name for these crustaceans are scuds. Many of the scuds are detritivorous. They eat detritus, but some, like this one here, are predaceous. They have these raptorial forelegs that they can use to snag unsuspecting crustacean prey. Most crustaceans are living in or on aquatic mosses, although some of these crustaceans burst to life with the addition of water on some terrestrial bryophytes, which is always cool to see. If you put a little bit of a terrestrial bryophyte in a petri dish and leave it to sit for as little as 12 hours, some of these organisms you'll see swimming around. They'll come right to out of their eggs, which exist as cysts when there's not water present. Okay, so that was some of the arthropods, the non-hexapod arthropods, but Act 3 is really, as far as an entomologist is concerned, where the action happens. And I can speak much more intelligently to the biology and the natural history of some of these organisms. So let's dive right into the hexapods here. Scene 1, the hexapoda of Act 3, starting with this group called the entignathans. This is just a fancy way of saying their mouth parts exist inside of their heads. We'll take a look at that and why that causes some problems for them. But this is the basic hexapod body plan here. It's comprised of 3 segments, a head, a thorax, and abdomen, right? This is pretty, hopefully familiar stuff. Most hexapods have 1 pair of antennae, but of course, this is biology. There are always exceptions, as we'll see here shortly. And then, of course, as their name implies, hexapoda, this means the 6-legged arthropods. And so all hexapods have a head, a thorax, an abdomen, and 6 walking legs. But are these true insects? What an interesting question. In our elementary school classrooms, if an organism met all of these criteria, we would call them an insect, but evolution is a little bit more nuanced than that. So let's take a look. These are hexapods, but they are not insects. So this is a little mnemonic that I use to help keep things straight. All insects are hexapods, but not all hexapods are insects. And here is one example, the proturans. The common name is coneheads, and you can kind of see why their heads are cone-shaped. These organisms are soil-dwelling, moss-dwelling. They need a high content of organic material to sustain themselves. They're bacterial grazers. And in almost all of my entomological lectures, I bring up these organisms briefly and I say, here it is, you're an entomologist, you're never going to see this. But you all are a very special group because you stand a very good chance of encountering these organisms in your investigations. Proturans are common denizens of mosses. You have to look hard and know what you're looking for. But if you encounter these, you will have seen an organism most entomologists never will. So it's just lovely getting to talk about these hexapod, entignathus arthropods and give them sort of the glory and attention they deserve and not just dismissing them as these obscurities. Here is another one. And so before we move on, I will here to remind me, this is the only hexapod order that lacks antennae, right? All the other hexapod orders we're going to take a look at now will have that 1 pair of antennae. that still does not qualify them as insects. So here's the next group of non-insect hexapods. These are the diplurans. Their common name are the two-tails. You can see how they get that name. They have these two caudal filaments that come off the posterior end. And there's two suborders here. The first suborder is a detritivore, and that's here on the lower left. They're gentle, they're very cool, they're very dainty invertebrates. Again, you stand a very good chance of seeing these if you examine mosses often. And then the second suborder is this predaceous suborder, and their cerci are a little bit more weaponized. They kind of look like earwigs, and they have these pinching appendages on the posterior end, vicious, sneaky little predators lurking around mosses and easily preying on their cousins here, the more docile diplurans, as well as other invertebrates. Okay, on to the cutest of the non-insect hexapods, the colymbolans. I'm sure you are all at least peripherally familiar with this group. Colymbola are commonly known as the springtails. Some people call them snow fleas. There are some colymbolans that live on snow, but colymbolans are ubiquitous throughout sediment or any kind of substrate. And so they're definitely denizens of mosses. There are colymbolans that will use the water drops on mosses as a balancing act when they jump. Here's how they get their name. The springtails here, here's a picture of one in midair and mid-flip. This appendage coming off of the back end of this organism is called a furcula, and it has been released in this image, but normally that appendage is held under tension, tucked up in between the legs here. And when a colymbolan feels threatened or senses any sort of peril, it will release the tension of that furcula. The furcula will snap down onto the substrate, and this little organism will backflip away from danger. They're quite cute little acrobats, almost little circus clowns, and very adorable. So those are the three extant orders of what we call these Entognathus, the internalized mouth part arthropods. They're not true insects. And so let's get into what makes a true insect here. In order to classify or count as a true insect from sort of an evolutionary or cladistic perspective, you have to have this structure called a tentorium. This is just an internalized head skeleton. The three orders of hexapods we just looked at don't have this. Their mouth parts are internalized, which means whenever any of those organisms go to eat, they have to project their mouth parts out of their head capsule, grab food, and then retract their mouth parts back in to process it. The problem with this is that the brain is also in the head capsule, and if you don't have this internalized head structure and mouth parts are constantly popping in and out of your head capsule, your entire brain gets distorted every time you chew your food. It puts a serious limit on the intellect of some of these organisms, as well as their chewing power. So the tentorium is this awesome structure. It's actually invaginated folds of the exoskeleton, and it provides additional structure so that the head doesn't distort every time an insect goes to chew its food, but it also allows increased surface area for muscle attachment. So now insects can chew on much tougher things. The cellulose of the plant world is now on the menu. And like I said before, this tentorium is the first key evolutionary innovation of the true insects. If you don't have a tentorium, but you got 6 legs, you're not technically an insect just yet. Okay, I'm happy to take questions at any time. I'll give you all a chance to take questions at the end. So, but I'll give a chance right now because this is some more technical evolutionary information. Any questions? Have to see if I can see the chat here. Give me a little moment. Okay, no questions. Go ahead.
Do you have terrestrial? Do you find terrestrial snails in mosses?
Oh my goodness, yes. So I completely forgot about the mollusks, but you do find terrestrial gastropods, certainly snails and slugs in mosses. My immediate assessment of that is they likely will right? Because that humidity and that moisture is good for them as well. But they're probably not permanent denizens of mosses. Many of the organisms we've discussed complete their entire life cycle within the verdant bed of a moss. Snails might do that. Certainly, I mean, it would be a great place for them to lay their delicate eggs. But they're nomadic, right? They carry their house on their back. They're kind of hermits. They kind of just chug along. I'm sure there are some exceptions to that, but that's an excellent question, and I have completely neglected the mollusks. Stacy will harangue me for that because we were just having breakfast the other day, exalting the virtues of the mollusks, and here I have gone and forgotten them. Thank you, someone, for remembering. Thank you both. Other questions about some invertebrates here.
Are you going to talk about the orbatid mites at all? I haven't. Maybe I missed that.
Yes, I did have some beetle mites. I thought I put that slide in. This is, like I said, the first time I've shuffled these decks. But one of my scenes for the arthropods should have been the chelicerates, but I don't know where that slide went. There are some cool invertebrates as far as the chelicerates go. These are the arachnids. And so there's these special sclerotized mites that you don't find many other places than in a moss bed. And they are doing all sorts of I think most of these mites fit on all of the different trophic levels. Some of them are scavengers, some of them are herbivores, some of them are predators. Mites, it's a safe bet to bet that they do and eat everything. But there were two other sweet chelicerates that I wanted to mention that also live on mites. That was my scene one of the non-hexapod in arthropods, and that slide seems to have gotten lost. I'll find it and put it back. But one of the other chelicerates that is an exceptional denizen of mosses are the pseudoscorpions. They are essentially a scorpion. You can imagine a scorpion with the 8 legs and the chelicerae, the pincers, but they just don't have a tail. They are absolutely predators. They're hunting things like colymbolins and some of these mites, and they are an absolutely outstanding member of the Bryophyte world. And then lastly, of course, are your more run-of-the-mill spiders. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of species of spiders, all of them predaceous, all of them feeding on the bounty of the other invertebrates that call the mosses home. So here we go. I have kicked the poor mollusks to the curb and forgotten the arachnids here. I'm not being very inclusive of some of these invertebrates. Okay, so yes, let's continue on here with our scene 2 of the hexapod denizens of the mosses. We'll move on to the true insects here, starting with the hemimetabolous insects. These are insects that do not undergo complete metamorphosis. They undergo so-called hemimetabolous development. And all that looks like is the young, straight out of the egg, are essentially a smaller version of the adult organism. And we call these immature stages nymphs. So here we have an example with a stink bug here, an egg, and then several nymphal stages until it finally becomes an adult with complete wings. Dragonflies, similar idea here. They have aquatic nymphs in this case, and these aquatic nymphs get bigger and bigger. And then when the nymph is ready to molt into an adult, it will leave the water. But over on the left here, I just have a couple orders of invertebrates, of hexapods that we will see, true insects in mosses. So let's introduce ourselves to some of these. The first are the mayflies, and this is actually a lot of mayflies get a start in life inside aquatic bryophytes. Any of these aquatic mosses are host to a myriad of any of these ephemeropterous insects. Ephemeroptera, of course, meaning short-lived. These are the ephemeral insects. Of course, the adults live for only a few hours, maybe a couple days in some cases. And these are one representative of this group of insects called the Paleoptera, or the ancient winged insects. This has to do with the fact that they don't have sort of a ball and socket joint on their wings. When another member of the Paleopterous insects are the dragonflies and damselflies, they have to land and hold their wings outright, which is kind of like trying to do grocery shopping with a kite strapped to your back. It's very inconvenient. That kite can get easily damaged. And so you'll want a major evolutionary innovation in the flying insects was the socket to fold those delicate wings away. An interesting bragging right for the entomologists. You know, we're kind of under the foot of a lot of other zoologists here. But we do get boasting rights. Insects were the first animals to evolve powered flight on this planet. So there's a fun fact for you. If you ever have a zoologist who's driving you nuts, you can rub that in their face a little bit. So I was talking about wings earlier, right? The Paleopterous insects. Here's one of the first examples of the Neoptera, the new winged insects. And you can see here in the angel insects, this is the order Zoraptera. They can fold their wings flat across their back, as is imaged here in the lower right. Now, again, Zoraptera are a rare order of insects to encounter. Many people mistake them for termites. But if you work with mosses in any sort of capacity, this may not be as rare an organism to encounter. Many Zorapterans live under tree bark, but another subset of this group are also well-known denizens of moss. So these are the Zorapterans, the angel insects. We don't have a lot of these here in Colorado, but folks further out east and further to the west can expect to encounter these insects more commonly. The Plecoptera, the stoneflies. Now, these are the adult forms, right? The winged. All of the immature stages of the stoneflies are aquatic, and that is where you will find them dwelling in moss. Most stoneflies are predaceous, but here is one exception. This is a bryophyte eater. This is a diner here. This is Pteronarcis californica. This is the giant salmon fly. Their nymphs kind of remind me of dinosaurs. They're these ancient, prehistoric-looking, sweet insects. But the nymphs are aquatic. They live in rivers and streams, and you betcha aquatic moss is on the menu for this dinosaur. And then here's one of the predaceous versions. This is one of the golden stoneflies. This is in the genus Agnatina. I just had to show you all this insect. Certainly it lives in aquatic mosses, but it's using them as a hunting ground more than a buffet. And, just look at the beautiful, dazzling patterns on this organism here. This stonefly has stripes that would make a tiger jealous, I like to say. Oh, just a gorgeous, gorgeous insect. Okay. This is a sweet group. This is another order that is not very common in Colorado, but you folks down there in New Mexico and Texas especially, and Arizona and Utah, the web spinners, you probably have seen the males at your porch lights before. The females are wingless. They live in these silk galleries that they spin with little silk glands on their front legs. You can kind of see that in the males here. They have these swollen forelegs. That's where their silk glands are. They literally shoot silk out of their wrists like Spider-Man. And they live in these silk galleries, oftentimes under stones, but the primary diet of these insects are mosses. So this is one of the bryodiners here, the Ambiopterans. And again, these silk galleries are incredibly difficult to find in nature unless you have the tuned eye of a bryologist. I imagine you all stand a better chance of discovering some of these silken galleries than other scientists. So those are the Ambiopterans. I saw many of these when I was doing some of my work down in Texas, but they are not a common order here in Colorado, at least. All right, so that is some of the hemimetabolous insects, but by and large, by far, the most interesting hemimetabolous insects that live in mosses are the hemipterans. These are the true bugs. Their name means half wing, and that is part of one of the characters you can use to differentiate these insects from other insects. But true bugs really are defined by having this mouth part called a beak. And so just like all insects are hexapods, but not all hexapods are insects, all true bugs are insects, but not all insects are true bugs. In order to count as a true bug, you got to have this kind of hardware slapped on the front of your face. You have to have this impressive manifold up here. This is called the cibarial pump. This generates the negative pressure required to suck all sorts of juicy foods through this piercing, sucking mouth part, this straw. So true bugs, they enjoy their food like you would a Coke or a milkshake. They have these piercing, sucking mouth parts, and they have these cibarial pumps to power that suction right on the front of their face, right? It looks kind of like a radiator. Here's an image that just, many of you will be familiar with this insect here. This is Boisia tribatata. This is the box elder bug, not a moss denizen, but a beautiful example of the namesake of this whole order, the half wings. The front half of the wing is sort of this leathery chitin, this cuticle, and then the back half is this more delicate veined membranous flight portion. So these are the hemipterans. Let's take a look at some hemipterans that are specifically associated with mosses. Here are some notable bryophilic hemipterans here. We have the Cycadelidae, the leafhoppers, many species in this group. Cycadelidae is one of the most speciose groups of hemiptera. Fun fact, their name means little cicada, and they do sing to one another just like cicadas do, except they do it at a frequency which is too low for us to perceive. Then we have the Ceratocombidae. These are the true litter bugs, right? They're not dumping trash around. They, in fact, live in leaf litter and rich organic litter on the forest floor, and are often found rooting around to get some of the detritus out of some of the nooks and crannies of bryophytes, particularly mosses. And then here, this is an insect that I did not know existed until today while I was doing some last-minute research for this presentation. This is the family Pellurideidae, and I teased right at the beginning of the meeting while people were still trickling in that I discovered a new favorite insect family today, and here it is, the Pellurideids. Their common name are the moss bugs. This is a bug for you all, and they complete their entire life cycle inside of bryophytes. They never leave. They feed on bryophytes with their piercing, sucking mouth parts. They reproduce there with their little nymphs. And these are just strange insects. Here's some more images of Pellurideids. Here's a mating pair on a little piece of moss here. They have these spectacular eye stalks. They have this clear exoskeleton. These are minute insects, and they're considered living fossils, I discovered. They haven't changed morphologically in tens of millions of years. I think 60 million years or more. There's fossilized remnants of these insects that are morphologically indistinguishable than to some of the extant species. And so this is my sort of year goal for you all. One other thing about this insect is it has never been found in the northern hemisphere. So my task for you all, my annual goal for you bryologists, is to find Pellurideidae, dead or alive, in a moss. Your reward will be authorship on a new hemispheric record, a rare thing in this day and age. So as you go about, and if there are any group of scientists who would ever find this insect, it would be you all. So I implore you to keep your eyes peeled for Pellurideidae, the moss bugs. They're unmistakably weird, this awesome insect. So, and it's a rare thing for an entomologist to discover a family that they haven't heard of before. This is a sweet insect, and I have you all to thank for coming across it. So that is the hemimetabolous insects. We'll move on to the holometabolous insects. This is a very famous group. Holometabolous development is a very famous process. Complete metamorphosis, right? You know, the life stages, the immature life stages look nothing like the adult. And then there's this transitional stage, this pupal stage in butterflies, right? This is the chrysalis. And then you get this adult, this fully emerged. And so, you know, the mnemonic I use to help myself remember the differences between these life stages, right? Larvae of holometabolous insects are basically just stomachs with legs, and then the adults are just genitalia with wings. This is the young eating machine, and this is the adult reproductive and dispersing machine. And there are some cool holometabolous insects that call mosses home. One of them is one of my favorite. We'll talk about Boreas, the winter scorpion flies, here shortly. But there are a few other insects that are just characters that we can talk about that call bryophytes home. This is a denizen of two different types of bryophytes here. Nigronia sericornis. This is in Megaloptera. These insects' closest relatives that are quite familiar to most people are the lacewings, the Megalopterans, the Dobson flies, and alder flies. Their larvae are called helgramites. You can see that that larval over there on the left. And then the adults are these large terrestrial insects. Now, larval Megalopterans are predators, and they are often found lurking on aquatic mosses because of the rich availability of prey. But when these organisms pupate, these larvae will crawl out of the rivers and streams they called home and will find moss and pupate in terrestrial mosses. So the moss serves as an important metamorphic nursery for this insect here. And then, of course, this beautiful, sleek black adult emerges from these moss puparia. Here's a great group of beetles. Coleoptera are the beetles here. Staphylinidae is a family within this order. These beetles, I think, are best likened to weasels. They are low to the ground, predaceous. They often attack prey much larger than themselves. These are the insect equivalent of weasels, and you'll find many a staphyliniid species living in moss, preying on the denizens of mosses there. So these are the staphylinids. There are also herbivores that feed on mosses. There's an entire genus in this, the flea beetles, the chrysomelid beetles here, many different species in this genus, but all of them are obligate moss herbivores. So these are some of the moss diners. And they're quite cute, rotund little beetles. This is quite rotund for a leaf beetle here. And then here's just a quick smattering of the different species that exist. But all of these are moss feeding. And then here's a famous insect that exists in mosses as a larvae. These are the lampyrids. These are the fireflies. This is what a larval firefly looks like. Fireflies are beetles. And larval fireflies are semi-aquatic. They need habitats rich in moisture, which often means that they're associated with mosses. These organisms are proof that, yes, the gastropod mollusks like snails and slugs exist in moss, because these are snail predators. These are slug predators. They inject snails and slugs with their saliva, and they have a venom that liquefies the prey, and then they slurp it up. So there are the fireflies. And then there's entire species of lepidopterans. Here's just one example, the butterflies and moths. Often their larvae feed on mosses. They're well-known herbivores. Here's the adult here on the right. And then there's the larvae of this Eudonia mercurella. This larval caterpillar weaves a silk cocoon inside of the moss when it's ready to pupate into a moth. So here is a moss-loving moth. Try saying that 5 times fast. And then, I was talking to Stacy, actually. I have done some high elevation surveys of Nivian insects, and these snow-dwelling insects have very little to eat at these high elevations other than lichen and moss. And these caterpillars, they kind of look like woolly, this is a woolly bear caterpillar, almost looks like a little tiny woolly mammoth, if you will. They traverse these huge snowbanks to go to these exposed rock outcroppings where they absolutely feed on moss and lichens. So this would be an example of one of your bryodiners here. This is the star of the show, really. Boreas is a genus of scorpion flies. Their closest living relatives are fleas. But we only have one species here in Colorado, but you can find these anywhere where there's some significant snowpack for good chunks of the year, a couple months out of the year. The adults mate on the snow, and they emerge in winter to avoid predators, and their larvae are bryophagus. Their larvae require moss hummocks in order to complete their metamorphosis. And so these are images actually taken in a subnivean environment. So this is a moss actively photosynthesizing, actively living underneath the snow. A 6-inch snow bed on top of a moss can serve as sort of a greenhouse and insulate the soil surface level to within temperature ranges that allow photosynthesis and insect reproduction to happen. This is what the larvae of these insects look like. They're quite small, but if you see any of these in the mosses you examine, this is an order that is not common in North America, the scorpion flies. And in Colorado, this actually counts as one of our rare species. This is one of our rare and imperiled species because they require that snow. They're going to be at the front of climate change. They're definitely going to take a hit as winter becomes more and more unpredictable. And then there are just numerous flies, far more flies than I have the time to cover here today. But I just wanted to pull out some fascinating examples of mimicry and crypsis and camouflage. Some of these fly larvae are herbivorous. They will feed on the moss themselves. Some of these fly larvae are predaceous, and they're blending into the moss so that they can ambush their prey. But the panel right here in the middle is just a image of the type of mimicry the exoskeleton of some of these fly larvae have undergone. If you look at the upper left image here, you can barely see this fly larvae. These are almost all crane fly larvae that are hiding out in moss, either eating it or eating the denizens of it. And then here, of course, is the adult on the right. I do a lot of work in the high alpine here in Colorado, and I do a lot of sampling of snow-dwelling insects. There is a lot more insects out there on the snow than you would believe. And the cool thing about these insects is that the vast, vast majority of them have some way, shape, or form life cycles interwoven with a bryophyte. Here, I've just circled some of the insects that I know moss or some sort of bryophyte plays a large role in their life cycle, either as immatures or hunting grounds for adults. The fact that moss can photosynthesize under the snow provides refuge for a lot of these. So yeah, there's just an astounding amount of diversity out there, from protozoans all the way up through some of these insect invertebrates that call mosses home. And so I don't want to take up too much time of your meeting, so I'll stop there and address any questions that you all have or that come up in the chat.